Thanks for joining us this morning. Hello and welcome to Business Daily. I'm your host, Lee Ji-yoon. Before we get started, let's first take a look at what you can expect from us in the latter half of our program. Korea is looking to tap into a new market as it kicks off trade talks with 6 Central American countries. What benefits are there to reap and what lies ahead in negotiations? News of internet-only banks rolling out by the end of this year has industry watchers both excited and concerned. These stories and more coming right up. Korea's finance minister says the government is looking into extra stimulus measures of quote-unquote sufficient size, including the allocation of a supplementary budget to give the country's economy a lift. During a parliamentary interpellation session on Monday, the minister said the recent MERS outbreak has already greatly impacted the country's economy and that the government is looking closer into the detailed effects. In light of discussion about drawing up a supplementary budget, the finance minister said he would consider not only the impact from the coronavirus, but damages from a prolonged drought in the country, youth unemployment, and lackluster exports when determining the size of the extra budget. Korea's technological advancement in future growth engines lags behind the U.S. by roughly 3.8 years. Now, this is according to the Ministry of Science, ICT, and Future Planning, which said in the 13 industries identified last year as leading sectors for the future, Korea reached only 79% of America's development levels in terms of core technology. The fields include 5G mobile communication, smart cars, and intelligent robots. Korea is pushing to accelerate progress in 5G as it plans to unveil the world's first preliminary 5th-generation network during the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. Uribank has kicked off the dash to realize internet-only banks in Korea by launching a mobile-only bank, a prototype. Industrial capital, which will also be allowed to flow into the project, is being met with both welcome and caution. Our Eunice Kim reports.
Just last month, Korea's second-largest lender, Uribank, launched a mobile-only bank. It said its 7% loan product received a rousing response, with withdrawals already surpassing $270,000 daily.
With this interest rate, we have absorbed many who had relied on second-tier financial institutions, credit card loans, and cash advances.
Growing internet-only banks, also known as direct banks, is in line with the Financial Services Commission's push to cultivate fintech in the country. And just last week, it said it will clear the way for industrial capital to flow into the enterprise. Contingent upon legislative approval, the amendments will allow non-financial companies to hold up to a 50% stake in a direct bank, up from the current 4%, with conglomerates and dozens of other large firms excluded from this revision.
To lower entry barriers, we agreed the minimum equity capital should also be reduced to $45 million.
That represents just half of what's required for a brick-and-mortar bank. Tech companies in particular have expressed interest, including Daum Kakao, which hopes to advance its mobile payment system, Kakao Pay.
We're always open to forging partnerships with highly competent companies. We hope to be able to soon announce the launch of our own internet-only bank.
Amid the excitement, there's also a cloud of skepticism. Some wonder what the new internet-only banks will really offer in a landscape that already has some of the most sophisticated online and mobile banking operations in the world. Others yet fear an uphill battle at the National Assembly, as the FSC tries to push the amendments through amid lingering distrust that the new system could be used by companies as personal coffers. Eunice Kim, Business Daily.
Korea and a group of 6 Central American countries officially launched negotiations for a free trade agreement last week. If signed, this deal will make Korea the first Asian country to have sealed an FTA with this group of Central American nations, giving it a head start into the new market. Now let's take a look at what this deal is all about.
Korea and a group of 6 Central American countries, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama, started free trade talks in the U.S. city of Houston just last week. Although the trade volume between Korea and these 6 countries stood at roughly $5 billion last year, which accounts for only about 0.5% of Korea's total trade volume, the region is seeing fast growth. Over the past decade, trade between the two sides has doubled, and some 200 Korean companies are currently investing or operating in these 6 countries, resulting in 150,000 new jobs. According to Korea Trade and Investment Promotion Agency, the automobile and auto parts industries are expected to get a boost, given there's currently a 20% tariff on related goods. Seoul hopes this deal will also give Korean products a competitive edge over Japanese and Chinese exporters. We take a look at what lies ahead for this free trade deal and how Korea would best benefit from it.
And to tell us more about this, we're now joined by Professor Yang Jun-seok from the Catholic University of Korea. So good to have you here with us.
Happy to be here.
All right, so the two sides, Korea and this group of 6 Central American nations, have kickstarted their negotiations for a free trade deal. How far are they in these negotiations?
Well, they did a preliminary study. Whenever we start to negotiate FTAs, that means we already did a preliminary study with their academics and their government officials. So I suspect that most of the non-controversial issues have been worked out already, and they've laid out a basic blueprint where they're going to negotiate from. So I suspect that what they need to work out are some politically sensitive issues, and as politically sensitive issues, you don't know quite how long that would take, but I think the basics are pretty much worked out.
All right, well then, can you tell us a little bit about these 6 Central American nations? What are their strengths?
Okay, well, the 6 countries as a whole, they have a population of Brazil, but GDP of Chile. So there's a lot of potential there. But right now, because they're not that big an economy, our trade with them is not that much. As the report mentioned, they form only about 0.5% of Korea's exports and imports so far. So in some sense, there's not a big-sized country that we can trade with, but on the other hand, these are growing very quickly. So there's a lot of potential for them to grow, and also there's some symbolic elements because these are the first Central American countries that we're doing FTAs with, and they're also some of the poorer countries that Korea is going to have FTAs with. Most of our FTAs have been middle income or above, and some of these countries, they only have per capita GDP of $2,000 to $3,000. So we're reaching beyond the sort of more developed countries and going into developing countries.
All right, well, you talked about their growth potential, but how exactly big are their market sizes? Okay, well, our exports to these 6 countries last year were $3.8 billion, and imports from them were $1.2 billion. But we believe that depending on what kind of negotiating results we get, the exports to these countries will grow by $140 million to $710 million, and imports will increase by $230 to $470 million. That's quite an increase.
Yeah, so there's a market there, and I think it's also important to say that some of the products there that we might be getting from them are fairly exotic or fairly natural resources that Korea always needs. So they're going to be interesting partners.
Well, we talked a little bit about how Korea is the first Asian country to have kickstarted negotiations for this free trade deal with this specific group of Central American nations. How important is this for Korea?
Well, as I mentioned, if you think about just the short-term economic impact, it's not going to be much. These economies are not that big, and our trade volumes are not that big. But diplomatically, I think it is very important, as I mentioned, because these are the first Central American countries that we're negotiating with. We're doing preliminary studies with South American countries as well. So if that goes through, then we'll have FTAs throughout the North, Central, and Southern American continent. So if we can manage to pull this through, then we'll have FTAs throughout the American continent. And also, as I mentioned before, these are probably our first FTAs with a group of fairly poor developing countries. So there's a symbolic meaning there as well.
And also with our export rivals like China and Japan.
Yeah, we'll definitely be keeping one foot ahead of them, at least in some of these countries. Japan, I don't think has FTA with any of these countries. China has FTA with one of these countries, but not all 6.
Okay. Well, what are some industries or sectors that we can expect a boost in once this deal is sealed?
Well, the report mentioned automobiles. They have very high tariffs against automobiles, which is typical for a developing country. But also some other industries that we can look forward to are smartphones and steel and construction equipment.
All right. And also you talked about some exotic products that these countries can bring to us, like natural resources and like coffee, tropical fruits, and metal to Korea. In that case, what sectors would see the greatest losses, though, from this FTA?
Okay, because these countries are placed in tropical type areas, agriculture-wise, they don't really compete with any of Korea's products. And because Korea is a resource-poor country, we always need more fuel, like gas and metals, and these countries will be exporting some of that. The biggest problem that I see potentially is light manufacturing. Some of these countries export quite a bit of computer parts, so they might actually be competing with Korean smaller computer parts makers.
All right, then I know we're only in the initial stage of the negotiations, but what should Korea remember in order to secure the best deal?
Okay, I think we should remember that these are developing countries, with the exception of Costa Rica and Panama, which has about $10,000 per capita GDP. The other countries only have about $2,000 to $3,000 per capita GDP. So I don't think we could expect the wide range of liberalization that we did with some of the other powerful countries. So we should expect somewhat bit less. But we also should remember that because these are developing countries, there's potential for the future. So perhaps less benefit on opening the export markets now, more interest in opening their foreign direct investment areas so more Korean firms can go in and invest in these markets.
All right. Thank you so much for your insight today, Professor.
Thank you.
All right, that wraps it up for today's edition of Business Daily. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back tomorrow with more business news that matters to you. Thanks for watching, and goodbye for now.